It started with laughter, soft, broken laughter, echoing through a soot-choked alley off Whitechapel Road. The kind of laughter that doesn't belong in a city still soaked in blood from Jack the Ripper's reign. But this wasn't Jack. This was something worse. The man they called the Laughing Man never slit throats in shadows. No, he turned your mind against itself, until you begged to go mad just to be free of him. London, 1887. The empire was burning under the weight of its own illusions, civility, progress, moral purity. But behind the gas lamps and corseted righteousness was a subterranean current, asylum experiments, Masonic blood rituals, and whispers of a man who didn't kill for lust or greed, but for control. Not of bodies, but of perception itself. Scotland Yard hushed his name from their ledgers. Doctors signed gag orders. Priests crossed themselves backwards. And yet, every now and then, another case appeared, same signature. Empty eyes, a disfigured smile carved into rigor mortis, and a single phrase burned into the walls or flesh. I see now. They called him the Laughing Man because he didn't hide. He laughed at the investigations, at the press, at God, and those who pursued him. They stopped, not because they died, but because they changed. Every man who looked for him came back broken, haunted, or worse, a converted. This isn't just a story. This is a study in institutional blindness. A case buried in the rubble of polite society. You're about to uncover a timeline the crown erased, that history sterilized, and that modern psychiatry dares not touch. Because at its core is a truth that flips the mirror inward. The question isn't who he was. It's what he revealed. This is not about Jack. This is about the man who lived in Jack's shadow, and orchestrated madness not as murder, but as liberation. Breathe deep. You are not just watching a story. You're standing at the gates of a truth men have died to bury. And the deeper you go, the less of you will return. They say the first victim wasn't killed. She simply disappeared and came back different. Eleanor Wickham, age 27, a housemaid to a wealthy parliamentarian, disappeared for 4 days in the spring of 1887. When she returned, she was barefoot, head shaved, eyes bloodshot from days without sleep. She didn't speak. Not at first. Then came the laughter. Not hers. His, from inside her mouth. She mimicked it with perfect cadence, as if it were echoing from somewhere deeper than her lungs. Witnesses said it felt like being watched through her, not by her. Doctors called it hysteria. The church whispered possession, but one coroner's assistant, who kept a journal they never wanted published, claimed something else. The girl wasn't mad. She was reprogrammed. Like herself had been replaced, line by line. She said he spoke to her in dreams, that he wore no mask, but his face changed with your fears, that he laughed not out of joy, but as rejection, of everything sacred, sane, or structured. And she left a drawing in her room before they took her to Bethlehem Asylum. A spiral. Endless. Inside it a word etched again and again. Welcome. No one ever saw Eleanor again. But 10 more cases followed in quick succession. Same symptoms. Same signs. Same unnatural laughter. Men and women from different parts of London, different classes, different faiths, but all found near places of power: Parliament, the Masonic Hall, the Tower. The Laughing Man was not just choosing victims. He was testing leverage points, mapping the fault lines in the human psyche. And he wasn't working alone. That's the part they scrubbed. Every name connected to these events either vanished, fled to the colonies, or was institutionalized under false identities. Now here's the truth they never taught in school: the Victorian elite needed the chaos. A society gripped by fear is easier to manage. And a madman who breaks minds without touching them, he becomes the perfect excuse to implement control, under the guise of safety. But what if he wasn't just a tool? What if he was the architect? Every institution claimed to be hunting him. But follow the money, follow the disappearances, and follow the asylum records, and you'll see the game. They weren't trying to stop him. They were building around him. By the autumn of 1887, London was cracking at the seams. Not from crime, but from unseen influence. Panic gripped the elite, but it wasn't just fear of death, it was fear of exposure. Because behind every public institution, the courts, the hospitals, the universities, were quiet rooms where men met in candlelight, not to debate policy, but to discuss containment. Not of a killer, of an idea. The Laughing Man wasn't a lunatic in the alley. He was a symbol of force. A living virus made of language and ritual. And once you encountered him, you didn't die, you changed. What changed, precisely, depended on what you feared most. The headmaster of Charterhouse School slit his own throat after repeating, "I saw my father behind his eyes." The Bishop of Canterbury renounced the sacraments in the middle of a sermon, screaming, "His older than Scripture." And a royal archivist destroyed 37 volumes of dynastic genealogy, claiming they were authored by a liar in flesh. All three had one thing in common. They were last seen speaking with a man whose name never appeared on any census, payroll, or membership roll. But each time, the same description: average height, wearing a bowler hat, and smiling with a mouth that seemed too wide for the face. No one could agree on his eye color. Some said blue. Others said black. One said mirrors. Here's where it fractures deeper. An unpublished police ledger, found decades later during renovations at the Old Bailey, described an internal effort called Project Mirrorlight. The goal: track mimetic anomalies of psychological warfare. In other words, ideas that behave like infections. Who funded it? The Royal Society, with quiet backing from the Crown. Who initiated it? A psychiatrist named Dr. Alastair Thorne, publicly respected, privately excommunicated by the Church for unauthorized experimentation. His notes, confiscated and sealed in a vault beneath Lambeth, contain phrases no man should read aloud. Lines like, "He does not kill, he downloads. Lauder is not amusement, it is program initiation. There is no madness, only an operating system incompatible with truth." Now listen carefully, because this isn't just history. This is a blueprint. What if the asylums weren't for the mad, but for those who saw too much? What if the Laughing Man didn't break them? What if he freed them? The most disturbing records weren't found in a courtroom, nor a police archive, but in the ruins of a private asylum, Grinnell House, tucked away in Hampstead Heath. It was burned to the ground in 1891 under unknown circumstances, though survivors reported that the fire seemed to start from within every cell at once. Here's what was found in the ashes: charred fragments of journals written by the inmates, not staff. Not scribbles or ravings, but coherent pages, repeating the same strange insight. The Laughing Man does not exist. He is revealed when something inside you breaks just enough to let him through. Not a man, a mirror, not a killer, a key. These weren't patients. They were vessels, and each had experienced what they called the descent, a spiritual inversion, triggered by a pattern, a sound, a phrase. Some claimed it was laughter. Others, the repetition of their own name in reverse. One described it as being unzipped from reality. This is where forbidden history steps forward. In the Grinnell ruins, among the blackened bones, was a lead sealed box containing non-Victorian artifacts, Aztec, Babylonian, even pre-dynastic Egyptian. They bore the same spiral symbols found in Eleanor Wickham's drawing, and buried on the walls of ancient tombs associated with madness, prophecy, and ritual dismemberment of the soul, all connected by one unspoken function: control through awareness. When institutions cannot restrain a man physically, they rewire his mind. But if a man awakens outside their structure, sees the grid for what it is, they have two options: eliminate or enshrine. And the Laughing Man was the paradox they could not kill. So they made him a myth. They let him echo inside the minds of the broken, feeding him through fear, doubt, and institutional obedience. Because once you hear the laughter, real laughter, not joy but derision, you can never unhear it. It's the sound of a system mocking your submission. That's why the newspapers called him a ghost. Why the clergy called him a demon. And why the elite called him something far more dangerous: a liberator. Because he didn't destroy society. He made men see it. And once seen, a cage is no longer a sanctuary. You want more? It wasn't until a defrocked bishop named Edwin Hales began writing anonymously under the name The Witness that the pieces started to form a coherent picture. His pamphlets, distributed in secret among railway workers and former soldiers, were banned within weeks. Copies were seized, burned, or buried beneath church floors. But one survived, hidden inside a violin case, unearthed by a demolition crew in 1954. It opened with a warning, handwritten in Latin: "Do not read this unless you have already begun to unravel." Inside, Hales detailed a phenomenon he called lauder transference. The claim was audacious that the Laughing Man's power wasn't confined to proximity, but could be triggered by thought alone. That laughter was not a sound, but a psychic signal encrypted through symbols, trauma, and repetition. He wrote of sympathetic contagion, where men who merely studied the files, police officers, coroners, priests, began experiencing synchronicities: missing time, reflections that lagged behind motion, and most chilling of all, smiling involuntarily while discussing death. These were not coincidences. They were installations. You see, the Laughing Man was never just a murderer or myth. He was a code, an invasive pattern designed to rewrite belief systems. And once embedded in your psyche, it didn't make you violent. It made you aware. That's what terrified them, because awareness is contagious. When Hales fled London in 1889, he claimed to have discovered the original sigil, a glyph etched on a stone from ancient Ur, later replicated in the design of a Masonic ritual room in Piccadilly. The same spiral, the same eye, the same grin etched across Eanes. He ended his final writing with a phrase no historian could explain. If you hear the laugh, do not resist it. It is not madness. It is escape. Now ask yourself, why would a global empire work so hard to erase a lunatic's legacy? Why silence witnesses, burn buildings, destroy records? Because what he revealed was never about violence. It was about the prison you were born into. And once you understand that prison, you begin to see the locks, the walls, the mechanisms of control dressed as culture, morality, and tradition. It's not him they fear, it's you after hearing him. Do you hear it now? In early 1888, a confidential letter surfaced, addressed not to police nor clergy, but to the director of the British Museum's Restricted Antiquities Division. It was unsigned, sealed in red wax, and bore only a stamped sigil, the spiral eye. The contents? A single sentence: the relic speaks when the laughter begins. For months, that letter was dismissed as an elaborate hoax, until a low-ranking archivist named Henry Cavill, not the actor Cross, referenced the phrase with an object catalogued decades earlier, Item 847B, origin unknown, non-display. It was stored 5 levels beneath the public archives, behind 3 false walls in a temperature-controlled vault. No label, no record of acquisition, just a crude, obsidian tablet, etched with symbols no linguist could match. But when they brought it to the surface, something happened. The lights dimmed. 3 archivists vomited, and 1 woman laughed until her jaw dislocated. Security cameras failed. The museum blamed electrical malfunction, but Cavill knew. In his private notes, later found burned at the edges, he wrote, "It isn't a language, it's a software. And once you see the pattern, you can't close your eyes fast enough." He vanished the next day, his apartment abandoned, dishes still warm. But on the wall, written in ash, the words, "I was always in the room." You want to understand how deep the rot goes. They didn't try to destroy the tablet. They enshrined it. A replica sits in the core of a Masonic lodge in Edinburgh. Another was secretly embedded in the original blueprints for Broadmoor Asylum. Why? Because the relic doesn't summon madness. It attracts those who've already begun to slip. It's a filter, a mirror, a magnet for the mind that's begun to question the world around it. And that's the real threat. You, the man watching this video, are more dangerous to the system than any madman with a knife. Because you are awake enough to sense the fraud, but not yet obedient enough to surrender back to sleep. The Laughing Man's victims weren't murdered. They were selected. They were activated. And once the pattern locks into your subconscious, you begin to recognize the smiling faces in high office, the hollow laughter in media, the rituals baked into your childhood. All of it part of a program built to sterilize rebellion. Are you still with me? Broadmoor Asylum, England's fortress for the criminally insane, was not merely a hospital. It was a black site before the term existed. Opened in 1863 under the pretense of reform, it housed not just murderers and lunatics, but poets, polymaths, soldiers, and surgeons, all of whom had one thing in common: they claimed to have seen or heard the Laughing Man. You won't find that in the official records. But there are redacted files, letters written by patients in blood and charcoal, hidden under floorboards and inside Bible spines. One such letter, signed only CH, described the asylum as cathedral of inversion. Every corridor mirrored itself. Every room distorted time. The layout itself was designed to scramble cognition. You see, Broadmoor wasn't about healing. It was about reprogramming. The psychiatrists, all military trained. The orderlies, all former priests. The treatments, electric, linguistic, symbolic. Patients weren't sedated. They were tested. Forced to stare at rotating spirals for hours. Asked to recite backward prayers in candlelit rooms. Shown photographs that changed depending on who looked at them. And in the center of it all, in the basement chamber with no key on any map, was the mirror room. No lights. No furniture. Just walls lined with obsidian from the same quarry as the museum's tablet. The purpose? To make the patient see himself, not his body, but the layers beneath it. Belief, memory, identity, and then tear it down. One patient wrote, "I was shown my father's funeral before it happened. I laughed. I was punished. They told me the laughter wasn't mine anymore, that it belonged to him. The doctors called it progress. The church called it heresy. The crown called it classified. Broadmoor was not treating an illness. It was creating a new species of man. One stripped of illusion, molded by fear, and rebuilt by a code they didn't invent but inherited. That's what most people miss. The Laughing Man is not an anomaly. He is the outcome. The final product of a society designed to fracture those who see clearly. And if you're still watching, you've begun to feel it too, haven't you? The unease behind smiles, the dissonance in routine, the laughter that makes no sense, but never quite leaves your mind. Good. The rituals were never just superstition. They were psychotechnology, designed not to summon spirits, but to break down the firewall of the human mind. In the bowels of Broadmoor, and in other now raised institutions across the empire, Mortlake, Marston, Densgate, they practiced what the classified files call sequential induction protocols. These weren't designed to cure insanity, but to install it systematically. It began with isolation, 48 hours in pitch black, no sound, no movement. Then came reflection displacement, a series of distorted mirrors, each altering the patient's appearance slightly. Longer face, deeper eyes, a smile that wasn't theirs. These weren't random. Each distortion was tuned to the subject's personal fears, traumas, or ancestral guilt. Data gathered through confession or interrogation. Then came pattern exposure, spirals, glyphs, certain repeating auditory phrases, not chants, commands, spoken in an inverted dialect derived from ancient Aramaic, combined with Victorian English. One of the core phrases, "You are the dream. He is the dreamer." And after that laughter induction, patients were strapped to chairs and made to listen to hours of layered laughter. Some human, some synthetic, some from animals slowed to subsonic registers. Over time, the laughter no longer felt external. It moved inside, until the patient couldn't distinguish it from their own. Now, why does this matter today? Because those same rituals, refined and modernized, are embedded in entertainment, education, and even therapy. Think about it. You scroll through curated spirals on your phone every night. You look into distorted mirrors on every filter. You repeat affirmations designed by people you've never met. And the laughter. It's piped into every sitcom, every commercial, every reaction video, conditioning you to laugh on cue, even when nothing is funny. It's not content. It's coding. The same blueprint that created the Laughing Man's victims is now broadcast 24/7, wrapped in dopamine, humor, and comfort. Why? Because when truth becomes a virus, reality must become the cage. This is how control survives in the modern age, not by iron and fire, but by rituals so familiar you no longer question them. So here's your first act of rebellion. Comment the phrase, "The dream is not mine," twice. One for the algorithm, one for the man you were before this video began. Because if you don't claim your mind, someone else already has. You were told the Laughing Man was born in London 1887. You were told he was just a product of Victorian madness, some Gothic anomaly buried beneath fog and myth. But the oldest recorded instance, predating the British Empire, predating Rome, predating even written language, was found in the Karakum Desert, carved into the stone walls of a subterranean ruin known only to 6 living men. It's not in textbooks. It's not in museum exhibits. It was classified in 1952 by a joint project between British intelligence and the early CIA under Project Memo A by some mnemonic occult access breach. Inside that ruin was a figure, not painted, not sculpted, but scratched into the rock by hand. A man with no eyes, a mouth too wide, and behind him, spirals etched so deep they blood rust when touched. Beneath it, a single word translated by linguist Yusuf Karim before he was found dead in his Cairo apartment, mouth frozen in a smile. He laughs when we begin to remember. And here's where the cracks turn into collapse, the spiral. The one connected to the Laughing Man? The one found in Eleanor Wickham's drawing? The one in the British Museum's vault? Exactly matches the symbol engraved on Sumerian tablets dated 3400 BC. Those same tablets were cited in Babylonian purification rites, used not to banish demons, but to bind memory. You see, the Laughing Man is not a person. He's a function of this reality, a reset protocol embedded in our psychic architecture. When too many people awaken to the illusion, when too many question the facade of power, when too many begin to see through the rituals of church, state, media, and school, he manifests, first in whispers, then in symbols, then in faces, and always, always with the laughter. Not because he's amused, because he's seen this cycle before. And your awakening threatens the loop. Every age has tried to bury him. The Egyptian priesthood renamed him. The Greek oracles claimed he was a hallucination. The early church called him the false witness, and sealed his texts in the catacombs. But he always returns. Because once a man begins to see the code behind the world, something must come to silence him. And that silence wears a grin. The 20th century didn't destroy the Laughing Man's pattern. It digitized it. In 1946, as Europe smoldered from war and the U.S. claimed victory with fire and lies, a secret meeting took place beneath Princeton University. Attended by physicists, psychologists, military planners, and a select group of men from the Tavistock Institute. Their goal was simple: operationalize psychological control. The name of the initiative? Project Harlequin. Harlequin, as in the jester, the clown, the laughing face that hides the dagger, the same archetype embedded in ancient rituals, in medieval courts, in modern entertainment. But this wasn't about performance. It was about pattern replication. They weren't trying to find the laughing man. They were trying to become him. Using new tech, film, radio, pharmaceuticals, they began testing mimetic structures, sequences of sound, image, and narrative designed to induce cognitive fragmentation, split attention, subtle paranoia, emotional whiplash, laughter in the wrong places, horror in the familiar. You've felt it? That uncanny chill while watching something normal. That moment when a laugh track triggers dread. That voice in the back of your skull whispering, "This is wrong. This is not real." It's not your imagination. It's the system working as designed. Between 1952 and 1973, MK Ultra ran hundreds of sub-projects, not just drugs, but media prototypes, commercial jingles designed with military-grade pattern disruptors, children's shows seeded with sigils, news anchors trained to blink, smile, and speak in rhythmic intervals proven to induce submission. Why? Because they learned the secret the Victorians feared: laughter bypasses resistance. A man will question a threat, but he won't question a joke. That's why the jester was always present in royal courts, not to amuse the king, but to enforce the mask, to condition the masses to laugh at their own enslavement. The laughing man isn't just ancient. He's broadcasted. He's streamed. He's embedded in the code of your phone, your feed, your filtered face. He is not a person. He is a program. And every time you laugh at something that makes you feel hollow after, he grows stronger. They weren't kings. They weren't killers. They were architects, men who didn't just believe in the laughing man, they understood him. And they used him? Let's name them. Dr. Lionel Ferrister, head of psychiatric strategy at Tavistock in 1959. Behind closed doors, he referred to mass media not as communication, but as cognitive scaffolding for behavioral compliance. In a declassified memo, he writes, "The key is humor. A well-timed laugh is the softest hammer. The subject never feels the bruise." He disappeared in 1963 after claiming he'd received instructions from a dream, one where a grinning man injected color into his blood. General John A. Stoddard, U.S. Psychological Warfare Division, 1971, orchestrated the deployment of audio hallucination tactics in Vietnam, known as Operation Wandering Soul. They played ghostly screams and laughter through the jungle to unnerve enemy troops. But what they didn't report, the same hallucinations were later experienced by U.S. soldiers, even stateside. Some never spoke again. Others just smiled. Then there's Alain Drevaux, French cognitive theorist, spoke at UNESCO in 1980 on sociolinguistic resonance. But his private writings, only uncovered after his death, show his obsession with an entity he called Rear, the laugher. He believed the entity wasn't external, but latent, waiting in every human mind, dormant until triggered by certain frequencies, certain ideas. Now the most damning, Ezekiel Morrow, Silicon Valley investor, 1995, helped fund early social network prototypes, wrote a private manifesto for shareholders titled Emotional Harvesting at Scale. Inside it, he quoted from Project Harlequin, "If you make them laugh, they'll give you everything. If you make them laugh at themselves, they'll never take it back." These weren't madmen. They weren't prophets. They were engineers. They saw the laughing man not as a threat, but as a template. The media you consume, filtered through decades of this architecture. The smiling hosts. The punchlines. The ever-spinning spiral of distraction and mockery. It's not entertainment, it's maintenance. Because if they can keep you smiling, they never have to show you the chains. Most people think laughter is harmless, just an involuntary reflex, a social signal, a pressure valve for awkwardness or joy. That's what you were told. That's how they kept you blind. But laughter is a weaponized response. Understand this: laughter is submission. It's the body's acquiescence to contradiction, a surrender to cognitive dissonance. You laugh when something doesn't make sense but still feels familiar. When what you see collides with what you know, and you don't have the tools to fight back. In that moment of confusion, you smile. Now what happens when the institutions build that confusion into your daily life? What happens when your media, your politics, your culture, your very identity is layered in contradiction, irony, mockery, and you've been trained to respond with a laugh? You don't question. You don't rebel. You comply. This is the psychotechnology of the laugh. And it's deeper than dopamine. It's built into the nervous system. Laughter hijacks the limbic loop, short-circuiting fear, bypassing logic, and reinforcing the source of the stimulus. It rewards your captor. Why do you think totalitarian regimes have court jesters in disguise? Why do late-night hosts wear suits? Why do comedians mock truth, but never touch the mechanisms of control. Because the laugh is the leash, it feels good, so you don't notice when the noose tightens. They discovered this in Broadmoor, 1889. Patients strapped in sensory chambers would not scream when shown forbidden truths. They would laugh. A tight, high-pitched, unnatural laughter that went on for hours. The doctors thought it was madness, but they were wrong. It was defense. The mind's last line of protection when reality becomes unbearable. The laughing man doesn't kill with blades. He kills with grins. He makes the lie feel better than the truth. And once you choose comfort over clarity, you've already lost. This is why you scroll endlessly. Why the memes get darker. Why the punchlines make less sense. Because you're being trained not to understand, but to laugh through collapse. But now you've seen it, and once seen it cannot be unseen. You didn't download him. You didn't click some cursed link or recite a forbidden name. No, he downloaded you. The laughing man lives inside the architecture of your digital life. Not as a ghost in the machine, but as a pattern, coded, scaled, and monetized. Let me show you how. Every swipe you make, every reel you watch, every video that makes you grin, then feel empty, that's not random. That's behavioral engineering. Pattern recognition turned inward until your nervous system becomes the product. Look at the algorithm. It rewards contradiction. It promotes mockery over meaning. It saturates your feed with irony, sarcasm, inversion, until you become desensitized to sincerity. That's the gateway drug. Then comes the emotional whiplash. You scroll past a beheading, then a cat video, a school shooting, then a cooking tutorial. Your soul doesn't know what to do, so it does the only thing it's been trained to do: laugh. Not out of joy. Out of paralysis. This isn't just distraction. It's disintegration. It's your psyche being rewired through overstimulation and inconsistency, one punchline at a time. And behind it all, not a villain with a top hat and grin. No, it's infrastructure. Silicon Valley figured out what the Victorians only glimpsed: that if you can replicate the laughing man's effect, you don't need the man. You become him. The apps on your phone don't track you. They train you to reduce your emotions to emojis, to turn outrage into OL, to take sacred things, memory, grief, belief, and gamify them. You've been made into a mirror. You see horror, and you reflect humor. You see decay, and you respond with a meme. You feel your soul slip, and you double tap. But here's the worst part: they've made you think this is normal. They've convinced you that numbness is evolution, that detachment is intelligence. It's not, it's conditioning. And every time you laugh when something inside you whispers, "This isn't right," you are feeding the program. But if you've made it this far, if you're still watching, you're resisting. You thought the laughing man was just a symbol, a serial killer lost to history, a phantom in the gaslit alleys of Victorian London. But what if I told you he's now being used by modern institutions, not as a warning, but as a litmus test, a threshold guardian? Let me explain. In intelligence communities, there are psychological models used to test loyalty, not by asking direct questions, but by watching response patterns to moral horror. They present a subject with controlled exposure to atrocities, war crimes, child experiments, psychological breakdowns caught on film, not to punish, but to observe. They're not looking for empathy. They're looking for the smirk, the microreaction, the laugh. You pass their test not by rejecting evil, but by showing you've been emotionally hollowed, that your soul has been cauterized enough to operate without conscience. They call it emotional flexibility. I call it spiritual sterilization. It's the same trick used in Silicon Valley when onboarding new moderators for content review. They're flooded with the worst footage on the internet, and measured not by their shock, but by how quickly they detach. They're not curating content, they're being groomed. The laughing man is now datafied. He's been reduced to reaction metrics, coded into facial recognition software, and deployed in black box evaluations of everything from military recruits to corporate insiders. What you find funny, what makes you uncomfortable, it's all logged, analyzed, scored, and used to sort people into categories of utility: high-value targets, influencers with high engagement, users with ideal emotional volatility. This isn't just about TikTok. It's about PsyOps's entertainment. It's about whether you flinch when you see the blood, or whether you smile just enough to suggest you'll play ball. Because here's the terrifying truth. In a world run by systems without soul, the only thing more dangerous than a killer is a man who laughs at one. And now they're looking for men who can laugh. Not at jokes, but at real death, real pain, real collapse. And when they find you, they won't need to threaten you. You'll already be on their side. They told you laughter is medicine, that it heals, that it's human. But what they didn't tell you, what they never wanted you to realize, is that laughter can be weaponized. That in the wrong hands, humor becomes a scalpel, used not to heal, but to lobotomize. In the wake of the laughing man's reign of terror, something strange happened in the upper circles of Victorian society. The aristocrats, many of whom were terrified behind closed doors, began to host exclusive parties, mock tribunals, and plays that satirized the murders. They turned horror into theater. They took trauma and turned it into punchlines. Why? Because mockery is a defense mechanism. But more than that, it's a tool of conditioning. If you can get someone to laugh at what should terrify them, you've begun the process of emotional inversion. And that's exactly what institutions did. The court jester was never powerless. He was the reset button for reality. He could say what no one else could, and in doing so, trained the court to accept the unacceptable so long as it was wrapped in jest. In today's world, the jester wears a different mask: satirists, memers, late-night hosts, TikTok clowns. But the effect is the same: normalize the grotesque. Smile at your destruction, clap at your own collapse. Every time a brutal truth is softened through a joke, a layer of your psychological armor is removed. You laugh, not because you think it's funny, but because you don't want to seem alarmed. You don't want to be the only one who doesn't get it. That's the control mechanism, the fear of appearing naive. But real wisdom is knowing when a joke isn't a joke. Because the moment you laugh at what should enrage you, the moment you smirk at what should haunt you, you're not resisting. You're not surviving. You're submitting. This is why the laughing man isn't dead. He's been absorbed into the culture. Not as a person, but as a psychological contagion. The final layer isn't hidden in shadows anymore. It's hiding in plain sight, embedded within every scroll, every swipe, every feed. The laughing man's mask now lives inside the code, the algorithm, the very architecture of your attention. You think you're choosing what to watch. You think you're laughing on your own terms. But what if the joke is on you? Here's the forbidden truth. Modern entertainment is ritualized trauma. Every true crime docuseries, every serial killer dramatization, every meme that mocks suffering. It's part of a psychological buffet designed to do one thing: keep you numb. Why? Because a man who feels too much becomes dangerous. A man who remembers pain becomes unpredictable. A man who recognizes injustice becomes uncontrollable. So the solution? Feed him horror until he calls it entertainment. Show him the abyss until it becomes background noise. Teach him to laugh when he should be ready to rise. This is trauma-based programming. The Victorians used theater and spectacle. Now we use screens and satire. The medium changed, but the agenda did not. They want you engaged but not enraged. They want you curious but not courageous. They want you awake just enough to click, but never enough to act. And the most sinister part? They've trained you to become your own warden. You silence yourself. You second-guess your instincts. You call it PG humor. When your soul whispers, something's wrong here. That's not evolution. That's engineering. They've made sure that when a real monster walks among us, you'll just call him centric. You'll share the meme. You'll laugh. And you'll move on. Because to feel deeply now is socially inconvenient. But this ends when awareness begins. Right now, I want you to reclaim your inner firewall. Drop this into the comments, twice, to lock in your shift. The mask smiles because it fears the fire. The mask smiles because it fears the fire. That phrase isn't a metaphor, it's a trigger. A code. A reminder that not all who laugh are free, and not all fire destroys some burns to cleanse. The year was 1904. A private investigator named Elias Hargrove, once dismissed as a paranoid eccentric, returned from years abroad with a weathered leather satchel. Inside it, a set of hand-written journals allegedly belonging to Inspector Charles Winley, the man assigned to the original Laughing Man case. These journals contained vivid accounts, suppressed evidence, and most disturbingly names. Names tied to nobility, names that, if exposed, would not just rewrite the case but destabilize the legacy of entire institutions. Elias had one goal: reveal the truth before he disappeared. He didn't get the chance. 3 days after meeting with a journalist from the Westminster Sentinel, Elias was found dead. Official cause: accidental gas leak. But the flat had no piping, no prior issues, and no gas appliances. The journals, missing. The journalist, committed to an asylum for delusional psychosis within the week. But one entry survived, smuggled out in the lining of Elias's coat. A single page. It reads, "The laughter is not madness. It is tradition. It is not one man. It is a ceremony. And it is not over. I have seen the eyes of the ones who wear the smile. They are not haunted. They are hungry. They feed on silence, and we are their harvest." That's not just eerie. That's a confession from someone who saw the gears turning behind the theater. You see, the laughing man wasn't merely a criminal. He was a tool, a ritual, bound to a bloodline and protected by legacy. The murders weren't random, they were offerings. Message deliveries, trials. And the laughter? That was the seal. The psychological stamp that told those watching from the shadows the rite was completed. And now, in this age of irony and satire, the rite continues, but we're the ones delivering the laughs. We meme, we mock, we parody the very suffering that once summoned monsters, and in doing so, we fuel the next generation of masks. Ask yourself, what else has been rewritten? What other rituals are we unknowingly feeding? The forbidden history of the laughing man doesn't end with Jack the Ripper. It doesn't end in 1887. It ends with you right here, if you choose to break the cycle. Because some truths aren't meant to entertain. They're meant to ignite. Now that you've seen what hides behind the mask, what will you do when it looks back and smiles? Ask ChatGPT.